Hi, everybody. I'm back in Philadelphia on the McDowell family sofa. And I thought to close out the year, it would be good to finish up the last installment of the We Read Aloud. So I'm sorry, it's been about a week and a half since I've done a reading, but the link to the full playlist is in the description. So if you've missed out and you want to check out the earlier episodes, they're in there. So this is episode section 6. I actually, on the last one, I mistakenly said that was episode 6. So thank you for the person who corrected me. And I made that one before I left on my trip, episode 5, and now this is the actual episode 6, and I should be able to finish that because I think it's just about 20 pages. So again, Yevgeny Zamyatin's novel We from 1921, and I'm on the 35th entry here. And it says the topics are in a hoop, a carrot, and a murder. I did not sleep all night, a single thought. Since yesterday, my head is tightly bandaged. But no, it's not a bandage. It's a hoop. A merciless, tight hoop of glass steel riveted to my head. And I am caught within this single locked circle. I must kill you. Kill her, and then go to the other and say, now you believe? The most disgusting thing of all is that killing is somehow messy and primitive. Crushing her skull was something, it gives me a strange sensation of something sickeningly sweet in the mouth, and I cannot swallow my saliva. I keep spitting it out into my handkerchief, and my mouth is dry. In my closet, there was a heavy piston rod, which had snapped in the casting. I had to examine the structure of the breech under the microscope. I rolled up my notes into a tube, let her read all of me to the last letter, and I slipped the rod into the tube and I went downstairs. The staircase was interminable, the stairs disgustingly slippery and liquid. I wiped my lips with my handkerchief all the time. Below, my heart thumped. I stopped, I pulled out the rod, and I walked to the control table. Yu was not there. An empty, icy board. I remembered all work was stopped today. Everyone was to report for the operation. That's to remove imagination. Of course, there was no reason for her to be here, no one to register. In the street, wind, a sky of flying cast iron slabs, and as at a certain moment yesterday, the world was split into sharp, separate, independent fragments, and each, as it hailed down, halted for a second, hung before me in the air, and vanished without a trace. It was as though the precise black letters on this page were suddenly to slide off, scatter in terror, here, there, and not a single word, nothing but a senseless jumble, fright, skip, jump. The crowd in the street was also like that, scattered, not in rows, moving forward, back, aslant, across. And now no one. And for an instant, rushing headlong, everything stood still. There, on the second floor, in a glass cage, suspended in the air, a man and a woman, kissing as they stood, her whole body brokenly bent backward. This forever, for the last time. At some corner, a stirring, spiky bush of heads, and over the heads, separately in the air, a banner, words, down with the machines, down with the operation. Sorry about that. And apart from me, I, with a fleeting thought, is everyone filled with pain that can be torn from within only together with his heart? Must everyone do something before? And for a second, there was nothing in the world except my brutish hand with its heavy cast iron roll. A small boy, all of him thrust forward, a shadow under his lower lip. The lower lip is turned out like a cuff of a rolled up sleeve. His whole face is distorted, turned inside out, and he is crying loudly, rushing from someone at full speed, and the stamping of feet behind him. The boy reminded me, yes, you must be at school today, and I must hurry. I ran to the nearest stairs to the underground, and in the doorway, someone rushing past. Not running, trains aren't running today. There. And I went down, utter delirium, glitter of faceted crystal suns, platform densely packed with heads, an empty, motionless train. And in the silence, a voice, hers. I could not see her, but I knew this firm, pliant voice like a striking whip, and somewhere the sharp triangle eyebrows raised to temples. I shouted, let me through, I must. But someone's fingers dug into my arms, my shoulders like a vice, nailing me down. And in the silence, the voice, run upstairs. They'll cure you. They'll stuff you full of rich, fat happiness, and sated, you will doze off peacefully, snoring in perfect unison. Don't you hear the mighty symphony of snores? Ridiculous people. They want to free you of every squirming, torturing, nagging question mark. And you are standing here and listening to me. Hurry upstairs to the great operation. What is it to you if I stay here alone? What is it to you if I don't want others to want for me? I want to want for myself if I want the impossible. Another voice, slow, heavy. Ah, the impossible. That means running after your stupid fantasies, which wag their tails before your nose. No, we'll grab them by the tail and crush them, and then gobble them up and snore, and there will be a new tail before your nose. And they say the ancients had an animal they called an ass. To force it to go forward, ever forward, they would tie a carrot to the harness shaft before him, just where he could not reach it. And if he reached it and gobbled it down, and then suddenly the vice released me, and I rushed to the middle where she was speaking. But at that moment, everyone surged, crushed together. There was a shout behind, they're coming here. And the light flared and went out. Someone had cut the wire. An avalanche of bodies, screams, groans, heads, fingers. I don't know how long we rolled through the underground tube. At last, stairs, a dim light growing lighter, and once more out in the street, fan-like in all directions. And now, alone, wind gray twilight low just overhead, and on the wet glass of the pavement, deep, the upside-down lights, walls, figures moving feet up, and the incredibly heavy roll in my hand, pulling me into the depths to the very bottom. Downstairs at the table, there was still no you, and her room was empty and dark. I went up to my room and switched on the light. My temples throbbed in the tight circle of the hoop. I was still locked within the same circle. The table, on the table, the white roll, bed, door, table, white roll, and in the room on the left, the shades were down. On the right, over a book, a knobby bald head. The forehead had a huge yellow parabola. The wrinkles on the forehead, a row of yellow illegible lines. Sometimes our eyes would meet, and then I felt they were about me, those yellow lines. It happened exactly at 21. You came to me herself. Only one thing remains clear in my memory. I breathed so loudly that I heard my own breathing, and tried to lower it and could not. She sat down, smoothed her uniform on her knees. The pink-brown gills fluttered. Ah, my dear, so it is true that you were hurt. As soon as I learned, the rod was before me on the table. I sprang up, breathing still more loudly. She heard it, halted in mid-sentence, and also, for some reason, stood up. I saw already that place on her head, a sickening sweetness in my mouth, my handkerchief, but it wasn't there. I spat on the floor. The one behind the right wall with yellow, intent wrinkles about me. He must not see. It will still be more disgusting if he sees. And I pressed the button. What difference if I had no right to? It was all the same now. The shades fell. She evidently understood and dashed to the door, but I anticipated her, and breathing loudly, my eyes fixed every moment on that spot on her head. You've gone mad. Don't dare. And she backed away and sat down, or rather fell, on the bed and thrust her folded hands between her knees, trembling. Tense as a spring, still holding her firmly with my eyes, I slowly stretched my hand to the table. Only my hand moved and seized the rod. I beg you, one day, only one day, tomorrow, I'll go and do everything. What was she talking about? I swung at her, and I consider that I killed her. Yes, you, my unknown readers, you may have the right to call me a murderer. I know I would have brought the rod down on her head if suddenly she had not cried, "Please, for the sake, I agree, in a moment." And with shaking hands, she pulled off her uniform. The large, yellow, flabby body fell back on the bed, and only now I understood. She thought I lowered the shades that I wanted, and this was so unexpected and so absurd that I burst out laughing. At once, the tightly wound spring within me cracked. My hand hung limp. The rod clanked on the floor, and I learned from my own experience that laughter was the most potent weapon. Laughter can kill everything, even murder. I sat at the table and laughed, a desperate final laugh, and could see no way out of this preposterous situation. I don't know how it would have all ended if it had proceeded in a normal way, but suddenly a new external component was added. The telephone rang. I rushed, gasped the receiver. Perhaps it was she, but an unfamiliar voice said, "Just a moment." A tormenting, endless hum, and from a distance a heavy tread coming nearer, more resonant, more leaden, and then D503. This is the benefactor speaking. Report to me at once. Click. The receiver was down. Clink. You still lay on the bed, eyes closed, gills spread wide in a smile, and I gathered up her dress from the floor, flung it at her, and through my teeth said, "Here, quick, quick." She raised herself on her elbow, her breast switched sideways, her eyes round, all of her waxen. "What?" "Just that. Well, hurry and get dressed." All doubled up into a knot, clutching her dress, her voice strangled. "Turn away." I turned. I leaned my forehead against the glass. Lights, figured sparks, trembled in the black, wet mirror. No, it is I. The trembling is within me. Why the hell did he call me? Does he already know everything about her, about me, about everything? You dressed, was at the door, 2 steps to her, and I squeezed her hands as though expecting to squeeze out everything I needed to know from those hands. Listen, her name, you know who I mean. Did you name her? No, but only the truth. I must know. I do not care. Only the truth. No. No? But why, since you had gone there and reported? And her lower lip was suddenly turned out like the boy's, and from the cheeks down the cheeks drops. Because I was afraid that if I named her, that you would stop. Oh, I couldn't have. And I knew it was the truth, an absurd, ridiculous human truth. And I opened the door. 36th entry. Blank pages, the Christian God, about my mother. It's strange. There seems to be a blank white page inside my head. I don't remember how I walked there, how I waited. I know I waited. Nothing. Not a single sound or a face or gesture, as if all the lines connecting me with the world were cut. I recalled myself only when I stood before him and was terrified to raise my eyes. I saw only his huge cast iron hands upon his knees. These hands seemed to weigh down even him, bending his knees, and slowly he moved his fingers. The face was somewhere high up in a haze, and it seemed to me that his voice did not thunder, did not deafen me, was like an ordinary human voice only because it came to me from such a height. And so you too, you, the builder of the integral, you who were to have become the greatest of the conquistadors, you whose name was to initiate a new magnificent chapter in the history of the one state, you. And the blood rushed to my head, my cheeks, again a blank page, nothing but the pulse of my temples and the resonant voice above, but not a single word. It was only when he ceased to speak that I recovered. I saw the hand moved with the weight of 100 tons, crept slowly, and a finger pointed at me. Well, why are you silent? Is this so, or is it not? An executioner? It is so, I answered obediently, and then I clearly heard every word he spoke. Oh, well, you think I am afraid of this word. Have you ever tried to pull off its shell and see what is inside? I will show you. Remember, a blue hill, a cross, a crowd. Same, above, splashed with blood, are nailing a body to a cross. Others below, splashed with tears, are looking on. Does it not seem to you that the role of those above is the most difficult, the most important? If not for them, would this entire majestic tragedy have taken place? They were reviled by the ignorant crowd, but for that, the author of the tragedy, God, should have rewarded them all the most generously. And what about the most merciful Christian God, slowly roasting in the fires of hell all who would not submit? Was he not an executioner? And was the number of those burned by the Christians on the bonfires less than the number of burned Christians? Yes, yet you understand this God was glorified for ages as the God of love. Absurd. No, on the contrary, it is testimony to the incredible wisdom of man inscribed in blood. Even at that time, wild, shaggy, he understood true algebraic love of humanity is inevitably inhuman, and the inevitable mark of truth is its cruelty. Just as the inevitable mark of fire is that it burns. Show me fire that does not burn. Well, argue with me and prove the contrary. How could I argue? How could I argue when these were formerly my own ideas, except that I had never been able to clothe them in such brilliant, impenetrable armor? I was silent. If this means that you agree with me, then let us talk like adults. After the children have gone to bed, let us say it all to the very end. I ask you, what did people from their very infancy pray for, dream about, long for? They longed for someone to tell them, once and for all, the meaning of happiness, and then to bind them to it with a chain. What are we doing now, if not this very thing? The ancient dream of paradise. Remember, those in paradise no longer know desires, no longer know pity or love. They are only the blessed, with their imaginations excised. This is the only reason why they are blessed. Angels, obedient slaves of God, and now at the very moment when we have already caught up with the dream, when we have seized it so, and he clenched his hand as if it held a stone, it would have squeezed juice out of it. And when all that needed to be done was to skin the quarry and divide it into shares, at this very moment, the cast iron echoing voice suddenly broke off. I was red as a bar of iron in the anvil under a striking hammer. The hammer hung silently, and waiting for it was even more terrifying. And then suddenly, how old are you? 32. And your naivete is of someone half that age, someone of 16. Has it really never entered your head that well, we still don't know their names, but I am certain we shall learn them from you, that they needed you only as a builder of the integral, only in order to use you as a. Don't, I cried. It was like holding up your hands and shouting it to a bullet. You still hear your ridiculous don't, and the bullet has already gone through you, and you are already writhing on the floor. Yes, the builder of the integral, yes. And all at once, the memory of Yu's raging face, quivering brick red gills that morning when they both were in the room. I clearly remember. I laughed and I raised my eyes, and before me sat a bald, Socratically bald man with tiny drops of sweat on his bald head. How simple everything was, how majestically banal and ridiculously simple. Laughter choked me, broke out in puffs. I covered my mouth with my hand and rushed out. Stairs, wind, wet, jumping fragments of light, faces, and I ran. No, to see her, only once more to see her. And here again there is a blank white page. I can remember one thing only: feet. Not people, feet. Hundreds of feet falling from somewhere down on the pavement, stamping without rhythm, a heavy rain of feet, and a gay, mischievous song and a shout, probably to me, hey, hey, come here, to us. And then a deserted square, filled to the brim with dense wind, and in the middle a dim, heavy, dreadful mass, the benefactor's machine. And such a strange, seemingly incongruous echo within me, a dazzlingly white pillow, and on the pillow a head thrown back with eyes half closed, the sharp line of teeth, and all of this absurdly terrifying connected with the machine. I know how, but I still refuse to see and name it out loud. I do not want to, no. I shut my eyes and I sat down on the stairs leading to the machine. It must have been raining. My face was wet. Somewhere in the distance, muffled cries, but no one hears me cry. Save me from this. Save me. If I had a mother like the ancients, mine, yes, precisely, my mother, to whom I would be not the builder of the integral and not number D503 and not a molecule of the one state, but a simple human being, a piece of herself, trampled, crushed, discarded. And let me nail or let me be nailed. Or perhaps it's all the same, but so that she would hear what no one else heard, so that her old woman's mouth, drawn together, wrinkled. This is the 37th entry. An infusorium, end of the world, her room. In the dining room in the morning, my neighbor on the left said to me in a frightened whisper, "Why don't you eat? They're looking at you." And with an enormous effort, I forced myself to smile. And I felt it like a crack in my face. I smiled. The edges of the crack spread wider, hurting more and more. And then, just as I picked up a tiny cube of food with my fork, the fork shook in my hand and clicked against my plate. And at that moment, the tables, the walls, the dishes, the air itself all shook and rang and clattered. And outside, an immense round iron roar up to the sky, over heads, over buildings, slowly dying out far away in faint, small circles, like circles on the surface of the water. I saw faces instantly blanched, faded, mouths stopped mid-motion, forks frozen in air. And then everything was thrown into confusion, slipped off of the age-old tracks. Everyone jumped up without singing the hymn, chewing without rhythm, swallowing hastily, choking, gasping at each other. What is it? What happened? What? And like disorderly fragments of a once harmonious great machine, they poured down to the elevators, the stairs, steps, thumping parts of words like pieces of a torn letter swept by the wind. People were also pouring out of the other buildings, and in a minute the avenue was like a drop of water under a microscope, infusoria locked within the glass-like transparent drop, rushing in wild confusion, up, down, sideways. Aha! Someone's triumphant cry. Before me, the back of his neck and a finger aimed at the sky. I remember with the utmost clarity the yellowish pink nail, and at its base a white crescent, like the moon rising over the rim of the horizon. And if following a compass needle, hundreds of eyes turned up to the sky. There, escaping from some invisible pursuit, clouds were flying, crushing, leaping over one another, and shadowed by the clouds, dark arrows of the guardians with black suspended elephant trunks of observation tubes, and still farther in the west, something resembling. In the beginning, no one understood it. Even I, to whom, unfortunately, more had been revealed than to the rest, did not understand. It looked like an enormous swarm of black arrows, barely visible, quick dots at an incredible height. Nearer and nearer, hoarse guttural sounds from above, and finally, over our heads, birds. Their sharp, black, piercing, falling triangles filled the sky. The storm flung them down, and they settled on cupolas, on roofs, on poles, on balconies. Aha! The triumphant neck turned, and I saw that one of the overhanging brow, but now the only thing remaining of his old self was the description. He had somehow emerged from under his eternal brow, and his face was overgrown with bright clusters of rays, like hair around the eyes, at the lips, and he was smiling. "Do you realize it?" he cried to me through the whistling of the wind and the wings and the cawing. "Do you realize the wall was blown up? Do you understand?" Past us, somewhere in the background, flashing figures, heads stretched forward, running quickly inside into houses, and in the middle of the street, a rapid yet seemingly slow because of their weight avalanche of operated ones marching westward. Hairy clusters of rays at the lips, the eyes. I seized him by the hand. "Listen, where is she? Where is I-330? Is she still there behind the wall? Or I must, you hear, at once, I cannot." "Here," he cried gaily, drunkenly, strong yellow teeth. "She's here in the city, in action. Oh, we are acting." Who are we? Who am I? And near him there were some 50 like him, out from under their dark brows, loud, gay, with strong teeth, gulping the storm with open mouths, swinging seemingly innocuous electrocutors. Where did they get them? But they also moved westward behind the operated ones, but flanking them by the parallel avenue 48. And I tripped against tight, wind-woven cables, and I ran to her. What for? I don't know. I stumbled, empty streets, an alien wild city, an incessant, triumphant chorus of bird cries. The end of the world. Through the glass walls of some houses, I saw it. It has etched itself in my memory, male and female numbers copulating shamelessly without even dropping the shades, without coupons, at midday. A house, hers, the door gaping wide in confusion. Below at the control table, no one. The elevator was stuck somewhere in the shaft. Panting, I ran up the endless stairs, a corridor, quick like wheel spokes, figures on the doors, 320, 326, 330, I-330, here. Already through the glass door, I saw everything in the room scattered, confused, crumpled. A chair turned over in haste, its four legs in the air like a dead animal. The bed pushed somehow absurdly sideways from the wall. On the floor, like trampled fallen petals, a spray of pink coupons. I bent down and picked up one, another, a third, all bore the number D503. And I was on each one, drops of me molten, spilled over the brim, and this was all that remained. For some reason, it was impossible to leave them on the floor to be trampled on, and so I gathered up another handful and put them on the table, smoothed them carefully, glanced at them, and laughed. I had never known this before, but now I know it, and you know it. Laughter can be of different colors. It is only an echo of a distant explosion within you. It may be festive, red, blue, golden fireworks, or torn fragments of a human body flying up. An unfamiliar name flashed on a coupon. I do not remember the number, only the letter, F. I brushed all the coupons off the table, stepped on them, on myself with my heel like this, and went out. And for a long time, dumbly, I sat in the corridor near the door, waiting for something. Shuffling steps from the left, an old man, face like a punctured, empty, shrunken, creased balloon, with something transparent still dripping through the punctures, slowly trickling down. Slowly, dimly, I understood. Tears. And only when the old man was already far, I recalled myself and cried out, "Wait, listen, do you know number I-330? The old man turned and waved his hand despairingly and hobbled on. At dusk, I returned home. In the west, the sky contracted every second in a pale blue spasm. A dull, muffled roar came from there. The roofs were covered with black, charred pieces. Birds. I lay down on the bed and, like a heavy beast asleep, weighed me down and stifled me. 38 entry. Topics. I don't know, perhaps only one, and a discarded cigarette. When I awakened, the brightness hurt my eyes. I closed them tightly. In my head, a strange caustic blue haze. Everything is in a fog and through the fog, but I didn't turn on the light. How? I jumped up, and at the table, her chin resting on her hand, I sat I-330, looking at me with a wry smile. I am writing on this table now. Those 10 or 15 minutes, brutally twisted into the tiniest, tightest springs, are long past. And yet it seems to me the door has just swung shut behind her, and it is still possible to catch up with her, to seize her hands, and she may laugh and say, I-330 sat at the table, and I rushed to her. I saw your room. I thought you, but in mid-word, I tripped against the sharp, immobile spears of lashes. I stopped, remembering. This was how she looked at me that day, aboard the Integral, and yet I must now, in a single second, find a way of telling her, of making her believe, or else it will never be. Listen to me. I must tell you everything. No, just a moment. I have to take a drink. My mouth was dry, as though lined with blotting paper. I tried to pour some water in, and I couldn't. I put the glass down on the table and seized the pitcher with both hands. Now I saw the blue smoke was from her cigarette. She brought it to her lips, inhaled, greedily swallowed the smoke, as I the water, and said, "Don't. Be silent. It doesn't matter. You see, I came anyway. They are waiting for me below, and you want our last minutes to..." And she flung the cigarette on the floor, leaned backward with her whole body over the arm of the chair. The button was there on the wall, and it was difficult to reach. And I remember how the chair tilted and the two of its legs were lifted from the floor, and then the shades fell. She came over, embraced me, hard, her knees through her dress, the slow, tender, warm, all-enveloping poison. And then suddenly, it sometimes happens that you have sunk completely into a sweet, warm dream, and then suddenly you're stung by something. You start, and you are wide awake. And so now the trampled pink coupons on the floor in her room, On one, the letter F and some figures. They tangled within me into a single knot, and even now I don't know what the feeling was, but I crushed her, and so that she cried out with pain. In a minute of those 10 or 15, on the dazzling white pillow, her head thrown back with the half closed eyes, the sharp, sweet line of teeth, and all the time the persistent, absurd, tormenting intimation of something that must not be remembered now. And I press her ever more tenderly, more cruelly, the blue spots from my fingers deeper and brighter. And without opening her eyes, I noticed this. She said, I heard that you were at the benefactor's yesterday. Is that true? Yes, it is. And then her eyes opened wide, and I took pleasure in watching how rapidly her face paled, faded, disappeared, nothing but eyes. I told her everything, except I don't know why. No, it isn't true. I know, except for the one thing, the words he had spoken at the very end, that they had needed me only. And gradually, like a photographic image in the developer, her face emerged, her cheeks, the white line of her teeth, her lips. She rose and went over to the mirrored closet door. Again, my mouth was dry. I poured myself some water, but it nauseated me, and I put the glass back on the table and asked, Is this what you have come for? You needed to find out. The sharp, mocking triangle of the eyebrows raised to the temples looked at me from the mirror, and she turned to say something to me but said nothing. There was no need. I knew. Bid her goodbye. I moved, my alien feet caught at the chair. It fell prone, dead like the other one in the room. Her lips were cold as once upon a time the floor here near my bed, and when she left, I sat down on the floor and bent my head over her discarded cigarette. I cannot write anymore. I do not want to anymore. This is the 39th entry. The end. All of this was like the final grain of salt rubbed into a saturated solution. Rapidly bristling like needles, the crystals began to form, congeal, solidify, and it was clear to me all is decided tomorrow morning. I shall do it. It is the same as killing myself, but perhaps this is the only way to resurrection, for only what is killed can be resurrected. In the west, the sky shuddered every second in a blue spasm. My head burned and hammered. I sat so all night, falling asleep only at 7 in the morning when the darkness was already drawn out, turning green, and I could see the bird-strewn roofs. I awakened at 10. There had evidently been no bell today. A glass of water, last night's, stood on the table. I gulped it down greedily and ran out. I had to do it quickly as I could. The sky was empty, blue of all of it eaten away by the storm. Jagged corners of shadows, everything cut out of blue autumn air, thin, too fragile to be touched, or it will snap, be pulverized to flying glass dust. And the same within me. I must not think, I must not think, I must not think. And I did not think. Perhaps I did not even see properly, merely registered. There on the pavement, branches from somewhere, their leaves green, amber, crimson. Up above, crossing each other's paths, birds and arrows tossing this way and that. Here, heads, open mouths, arms waving, branches, all of this must have been shouting, cawing, buzzing, and then empty streets as if swept clean by plague. I remember tripping on something, unbearably soft, yielding it yet motionless, and I bent down, a corpse. It lay on its back, its bent legs spread apart like a woman's. The face. I recognized the lips, which even now seemed to spray me with laughter. With tightly shut eyes, he laughed into my face. A moment, I stepped across him and ran because I could bear it no longer. I had to get it over with quickly, or else I felt I would snap, warp like an overloaded rail. Luckily, I was already just 20 steps away. Here was the sign with the golden letters, Office of the Guardians. And on the threshold, I stopped and I took a deep gulp of air, as much as I could hold, and entered. And inside, in the corridor, there was an endless queue of numbers, some with their sheets of paper, others with thick notebooks in their hands. Slowly, they would move a step, two, and then stop again. I rushed along the queue. My head was splitting. I grabbed people by the elbow, pleaded with them as a sick man pleads to hurry, to give him something that would end his torment in a single moment of sharpest pain. A woman with the belt drawn tightly over her unif, the bulging hemispheres of her rear end continually moving from side to side as though she had eyes in them, snorted at me. He has a bellyache. Take him to the toilet. There, the second door on the right. And they laughed at me, and from this laughter something rose up in my throat, and in a moment I'd scream or and then suddenly someone seized me by the elbow from behind, and I turned, translucent wing-like ears. This time, though, they were not pink as usual, but scarlet. His Adam's apple was jumping up and down in his throat. Another second, and it would break the thin sheath of skin. Why are you here? He asked quickly, boring into me. I clutched at him. Quick, let's go to your office. I must immediately about everything. It's good. It will be you. It may be terrible, but that it has to be you is good. It's good. He also knew her, and this made it still more agonizing for me, but perhaps he too would shudder when he heard, and then we would be killing her together. I would not be alone that dreadful last moment of my life. And the door slammed shut. I remember a piece of paper stuck to the door below and scraped against the floor while it was closing, and then a strange, airless silence covered us as though a glass bell had descended on the room. If he had said a single word, no matter which, even the most trivial, I would have burst out with everything at once. But he was silent. And straining till my ears hummed, I said, without looking up, it seems to me I have always hated her from the very first. I fought against, but no, don't believe me. I could and did not want to save myself. I wanted to perish. This was more precious, more desirable than anything else. I mean, not perish, but so that she, and even now, when I know everything, you know that I was summoned by the benefactor. Yes, I know. But the thing he told me, you understand, it was as if the floor were to be pulled this moment from under you and all around you, and all that's on this table, the paper, the ink would spurt, and everything a shapeless blot. Go on, but hurry, others are waiting outside. And then the breathless, confused, I told him everything I'd written down here about the real me and the shaggy me and what she told me that day about my hands. And yes, that was when it all began, and how I had not wanted to fulfill my duty, but how I had deceived myself, and how she had gotten false medical certificates, and how the corrosion in me grew from day to day, and about the corridors below, and how out there beyond the wall, and all of this in disconnected lumps and fragments, and I panted. I lacked words. The crooked, doubly curved lips offered me the needed words with a dry grin, and I nodded gratefully. Yes. And then, what did it mean? And then he was speaking for me, and I merely listened. Yes, and then, that's exactly how it was. Exactly. Yes. I felt my neck around the collar, turning cold, as if from ether, and I asked with difficulty, but how? But you couldn't have known, not this. And his grin silent, more and more crooked. Then, but you know there was something you've tried to keep from me. You've named everyone you saw behind the wall, but you've forgotten one. Do you deny it? Don't you remember for a second, a flash, you saw me? Yes, me. A pause, and suddenly with lightning, shameless clarity, I knew he was also one of them, and all of me, all of my pain, and all that in utter exhaustion with a final effort. It had brought me here as if performing a great feat. All of this would be merely as ridiculous as the ancient anecdote about Abraham and Isaac. Abraham, in a cold sweat, had already lifted the knife over his son, over himself, when suddenly there was a voice from above. Don't bother. I was only joking. Without tearing my eyes away from the increasingly crooked grin, I pressed my hands against the edge of the table and slowly rode away, together with my chair, and then suddenly, as though gathering all of myself into an armful, I dashed out blindly, past cries, stares, and mouths. I don't remember how I got downstairs. I found myself in one of the public toilets in an underground station. Above, everything was perishing. The greatest and most rational civilization in history was collapsing. But here, by someone's irony, all of it was as it had been, beautiful and still. And just to think that all of it was doomed, the grass would overgrow all of it, and only myths would remain. I moaned aloud, and at that moment I felt someone gently stroking my shoulder. It was my neighbor, who occupied the seat on my left. His forehead, an enormous bald parabola on the forehead, yellow illegible lines of wrinkles, and those lines were about me. I understand you. I understand you very well, he said. Nevertheless, you must calm yourself. Don't. All of this will return. It will inevitably return. The only important thing is that everyone must learn about my discovery, and you are the first to hear it. According to my calculations, there is no infinity. I stared at him wildly. Yes, yes, I'm telling you, there is no infinity. If the universe were infinite, then the mean density of matter in it should equal zero. And since it is not zero, we know that, it means that the universe is finite. It is spherical in form. And the square of the cosmic radius y cubed, y squared equals the mean density multiplied by. Now, I know this is the only thing I need to compute the digital coefficient. And then, well, you understand that everything is finite, everything is simple, everything is calculable. And then we shall conquer philosophically. Do you understand? And you, my dear sir, are disturbing me. You are not letting me complete my calculation. You are screaming. I do not know what shook me more, his discovery or the firmness at that apocalyptic hour in his hands, and it was hard to know now. It was only now that I noticed it. He had a notebook and a logarithmic table, and I realized that even if everything should perish, it was my duty to you, my unknown beloved readers, to read my notes in finished form. And I asked him for some paper, and it was there that these last lines were written. I was just about to put the final period to these notes, just as the ancients put their crosses over the pits where they had thrown their dead, when suddenly the pencil shook and dropped from my fingers. Listen. I tugged at my neighbor. Just listen to me. You must give me an answer out there, where your finite universe ends. What is out there beyond it? He had no time to answer. From above, down the stairs, the clatter of feet. 40th entry. Topics: facts, the bell. I am certain. It is day. Bright. Barometer 760. Can it be true that I, D503, have written these 200 pages? Can it really be true that I once felt or imagined that I felt all of this? The handwriting is mine, and now the same handwriting. But unfortunately, only the handwriting. No delirium, no absurd metaphors, no feelings, nothing but facts. Because I am well. I am entirely, absolutely well. I smile. I cannot help smiling. A kind of splinter was pulled out of my head, and my head feels light and empty. Or to be more precise, not empty, but free of anything extraneous that might interfere with smiling. A smile is the normal state of a normal man. The facts are as follows. That evening, my neighbor, who had discovered the finiteness of the universe, and I, all of who were with us, were seized because we had no certificates to show and we had been operated upon, and we were taken to the nearest auditorium. Its number, familiar for some reason, was 112. There we were tied to tables and subjected to the great operation. And the following day, I, D503, went to the benefactor and told him everything I knew about the enemies of happiness. How could it have seemed so difficult before? Incredible. The only explanation I can think of is my former sickness, the soul. In the evening of the same day, I sat for the first time at the same table with the benefactor in the famous gas chamber. She was to testify in my presence. The woman smiled and was stubbornly silent. I noticed that she had sharp and very white teeth and that she was very pretty. And then she was placed under the bell. Her face became white, very white, and since her eyes are dark and large, it was very pretty. And when they began to pump the air out of the bell, she threw her head back, half closed her eyes. Her lips were tightly shut. It reminded me of something. She looked at me, gripping hard the arms of the chair, looking until her eyes closed altogether, and then she was pulled out, quickly restored with the aid of electrodes, and placed once more under the bell. This was repeated 3 times, and still she did not say a word. Others brought with that woman were more honest. Many of them began to speak after the very first time. Tomorrow they will all ascend the stairs to the benefactor's machine. This cannot be postponed because in the western parts of the city there is still chaos, roaring corpses, beasts, and unfortunately, a considerable group of numbers who have betrayed reason. However, on the 40th Crosstown Avenue, we have succeeded in erecting a temporary barrier of high voltage waves, and I hope that we shall conquer. More than that, I am certain that we shall conquer because reason must prevail. And that is the end of We, Yevgeny Zamyatin. I'm trying to figure out the next set of books. These are the ones that I was reading while I was away. I'm partially through. This is Hugh Everett III on multiverse and game theory, Cold War game theory. I have this one, Damon Smith, about the corporatization of the LDS Church. It's very interesting because based on what I understand, he actually got his PhD in anthropology from Penn and is a member of the church. So there's a lot. I'm hoping if anybody knows Damon Smith to maybe get in touch with him and talk with him about impact finance. And I finished this one all the way. You can see I have like many, many markings in here, at least in these various parts. This is the Signals and Boundaries book. And I have to revisit all of my notes because there's important stuff about, I think, very much related to running life on reason and managing people. And then I went to Hovenweep. We went to Hovenweep, right on the border of Utah and Colorado. And it was a Park Service site. And I got this book from the 70s about the Hopi cosmology. So I'm hoping to write a little bit about that. I'm almost done with this book. I've gotten this far. So I have lots of books, but I'm thinking, I talked to Jason and he had bought a copy of World Sensorium and he said how helpful it was. So I'm thinking maybe, and I don't know if there's not many people watching, but in the comments, I have two choices and I'll probably get to them both eventually, but World Sensorium is one. And then also, I don't know if you know about Lois Lowry's book, The Giver. It's a children's book. And it seems like it's sort of a fiction book that's a lot like another variation on We, but from a child's perspective. So I'm going to be thinking about that. If you have preferences, let me know. So counting down to 2023. Still trying to sort of figure out what to make of everything. Being off of social media it feels a bit good, but also a bit isolating. I don't know what the things are that everybody's talking about. Mostly I've been still doing a lot of my own research around complexity theory and genetic algorithms and consilience, I guess. Trying to find I plan to keep doing this work. I might sort of back off a bit because I promised Jason a quilt and I kind of put it away. It's laying on my upstairs bedroom floor for the better part of the year, just ready to be quilted. I just have to sew the back and quilt it. And I also have another quilt in the queue. So maybe this winter I'll be a little bit slower about the research and let everybody kind of catch up. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the book. It's a little dry, but I think it actually is really meaningful. So anyway, good night, everyone, and Happy New Year.